Shalom and welcome to Portion Connections. Thank you for joining us for this discussion of Parsha Shalach. Well, this week, before we get into our discussion on the Parsha, I have some good news for you. The 2021 Malchut Conference for First Fruits of Zion Friends and Torah Club leaders is moving forward. The conference is going to be in Dallas, Texas on February 14th through 16th, and you are not going to want to miss this event. Malchut is a 3-day gathering focused on worship, learning, and community. Inspirational and informative lectures are presented by the FFOZ teaching team to inspire and excite your passion for what you're learning in Torah Club. The Malchut Conference is normally open only to First Fruits of Zion friends and Torah Club leaders, but we know that many Torah Club students would love to attend as well. Well, thanks to the +1 option, now you can. This program allows a Torah Club leader to invite a non-FFOZ friend, and that can be an individual or a couple, to attend Malchut and experience this excitement firsthand. So in the months to come, we're going to be sharing more about the Malchut Conference, including hotel and registration information. But for now, I want to encourage you to mark February 14th through 16th on your calendars and begin to make plans to join us in Dallas. Well, this week, Daniel Lancaster is going to be joining me for a discussion of Parsha Shalach, and Daniel's going to share with us where we see the shadows of the Messiah in the story about the 12 spies here in the book of Numbers. So friends, let's grow in the grace and knowledge of God while showing love and honor to one another as disciples. Torah Club is where disciples learn, so let's enjoy growing and learning this week in Parsha Shalach. Hey, Daniel, good to see you today. We are charging our way through the book of Numbers, and today I'm looking forward to getting your take on how actually the book of Hebrews gives us an important insight into our Parsha.
Yeah, fantastic. You know, the book of Hebrews is kind of a favorite of mine. Spent
Yes.
a lot of time working in the book of Hebrews.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts here. Okay. So in our Parsha here in Shalach, we've had Moses sending the 12 spies. 10 of them, of course, famously return with a bad report. And then 2 of them, of course, bring a good report. The people listen to the 10 spies. They refuse to enter the land. And God, of course, punishes them with 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, of course, until that generation dies in the wilderness. So where do we see the shadows of the Messiah in this story?
Okay, let's get started with Joshua, who is one of those good spies.
Yeah.
Right. And I want to read you a verse from Hebrews chapter 4. And in this passage, the writer of the book of Hebrews he's telling the story of God being angry with that generation, and he's quoting from Psalm 95, the passage in Psalm 95 that says, "Today, if you hear his voice, don't harden your hearts as your fathers did in the wilderness, in the day of Massa in the wilderness. I was angry with that. When your fathers tested me, I was angry with that generation. And even though they had seen my work, I said to that, I loathe that generation. And I said, there are people who err. They don't know my ways. Therefore, I swore in my wrath, they will not enter my rest. Truly, they shall not enter my rest." Okay, so that's Psalm 95. You understand?
Yes.
That the writer of Hebrews is quoting in Hebrews chapter 4 to bring commentary on Numbers 12.
Okay.
So there's a lot of moving pieces.
It's all
here.
over the place. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But he wants to make the point that the real meaning of God's rest, when he says, therefore I said they shall not enter my rest, you know, which we're talking about the promised land, that he said, therefore they shall not enter the promised land. You're going to wander in the wilderness 40 years. But the writer of the book of Hebrews is making the point that the real meaning, the secret meaning, if you will, of God's rest, when he says they shall not enter my rest, is not the promised land, but the kingdom and the world to come. So he makes a point of saying, look, when was Psalm 95 written? Not in the days of Moses. David wrote Psalm 95 a long time after the children of Israel had already entered into the promised land. So why does the Psalm say, today, if you hear my voice, or today, if you hear his voice, God's voice, don't harden your hearts as your fathers did in the wilderness? So in King David's day, what did it mean to enter God's rest? Because he's saying you can enter God's rest if you hear his voice. Don't be like your fathers in the wilderness, but they already are living in God's rest in the promised land. So what he's doing is he's inferring that God's rest, his menucha, does not refer literally to the land of Israel, but to something greater and more transcendent, if you will. And really what he's talking about is the kingdom of heaven and the world to come. And then he says, and here's what I wanted to, this is where I'm leading you up to here.
Okay.
Okay, now this is the King James Version, all right? Because I need to use the King James. You'll see why in a second.
Okay.
He says in Hebrews 4, verse 8, "For if Jesus had given them rest, then he would not afterward have spoken of another day."
Okay, now we need to pause there because most Bible versions, and I'm sure people are saying, whoa, what did he just say? Because I don't remember. It did some didn't ring quite right there. Most versions for Hebrews 4, verse 8 say, "For if Joshua, not Jesus, if Joshua had given them rest, he would not have spoken of another day after that." So what's going on?
Right, exactly. I mean, that's the point. Joshua is the one who leads them into the promised land. So what he's saying is, if Joshua had given them rest when he led them into the promised land, then David wouldn't later be talking about some other rest that you can enter into. But that's not what it says. It doesn't say Joshua in the Greek. It says Jesus. Okay, so here's the reason. Here's why. The name Joshua comes up in this Torah portion, where we're told about Joshua, who is one of the two good spies, right?
Yeah.
And in our Torah portion, it tells us that his real name or his given name is Hoshea. Hoshea means salvation, right? But Moses changes his name by adding one of the letters from God's name to his name to change his name to Yehoshua, which means the Lord saves, or the Lord is salvation. Okay, and that comes into English as Joshua, all right? But in the language, in the vernacular, in the language of the Jewish people after the captivity in Babylon, which was Aramaic, Yehoshua is truncated in Aramaic to Yeshua. Okay, so Yeshua actually is the same name as Yehoshua. It's kind of a Bob Robert type of thing, or a Jim James type of thing. Yeshua is the exact same name as Yehoshua. So when people say, our master's Hebrew name is Yeshua, that's actually not true. His Hebrew name is Yehoshua. His Aramaic name is Yeshua. And then that, both Yeshua comes into Greek as Jesus, which is, Jesus comes into English as Jesus. So there you go.
Got it.
That's hence the confusion.
Got it. Yeah. No, I get. Okay. So this raises another question. What does the writer of Hebrews mean? What's the meaning here then when he says, if Joshua had given them rest, he would not have spoken of another day after that? Like, what's he really getting at?
Right. Okay. So, Joshua did give them rest in that he did lead them into the promised land. Moses was not able to, but Joshua and Caleb, they're the only two survivors of that entire generation. And so they're the only two survivors to be able to enter into the promised land. But the writer of the book of Hebrews is interpreting the psalm to mean that now we're looking at a different meaning, a different kind of rest of God's menucha, not God's resting place in the promised land, but the resting place of the promised kingdom and the world to come.
Got it.
And so he's making the point that Yehoshua ben Nun, Joshua, did not lead them into that rest. Instead, we need a different Yehoshua, Yehoshua ben Yosef, Yeshua of Nazareth. The later Jesus, if you will, is the one to lead into that rest.
Yeah, this is awesome. Okay, good. I want to keep going here. So this raises another question about the same passage in Hebrews 4. What does it mean when it says that the children of Israel in the wilderness had the gospel preached to them? That's fascinating.
Okay, so Hebrews 4, and this is in the King James again, okay? Hebrews chapter 4, verse 2 says, "For unto us was the gospel preached."
Right.
Yeah. "As well as unto them."
Yeah.
That is the generation in the wilderness.
Yeah.
"But the word preached did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in them that heard it." All right, so that makes it sound pretty clear that just as the gospel was preached to the generation of the book of Hebrews, the apostolic generation, it was also preached to the generation in the wilderness. But here again, we're dealing with double meanings of words. The word gospel actually is good news. It just means good news or a good report. It comes from the Hebrew besora, right? And in Greek, the evangelion works exactly the same way. So you should never translate, really, I mean, honestly, we should never, ever translate gospel as gospel, because that's just an old English word meaning good news. And now it picks up a different connotation for us when we talk about the gospel, right? But it could be any good news.
Yeah.
So here's the question. What was the good news that the people in our Torah portion heard? And it was, I mean, the good news was the good news message of Joshua and Caleb. Joshua and Caleb were the ones who preached good news to them. And what was the good news they brought? They said, the land is very, very good. Tov meod, they said. It's good. It's exceedingly good. Arise, let us go up and take the land, for the Lord will deliver it into our hand. Surely, and so they had this good report. That's the good news that they received, or was preached to them, I should say. They did not receive it. They rejected it.
Yeah.
It did not profit them because they did not mix it with faith. They didn't have faith to go take the land. So let me lay out, because I'm afraid I'm losing people. Let me lay out the whole analogy here. So the writer of the book of Hebrews, our exhorter, he's writing to us, he's comparing his generation, the apostolic era generation, with the generation of Moses. So put these two things in your mind, the generation of Moses, the generation of the apostles. Both his generation and the generation of Moses stood poised on the edge of the promised goal, okay? The one standing on the edge of entering the promised land, the other standing on the edge of entering into the promised kingdom, the redemption.
Right.
So Joshua comes to the generation of Moses with this good news message. He preaches the good news. He says, let's go take the land. This is the time. God's giving it into our hands. But the people don't have faith, right? So they refuse to obey. They refuse to listen. They don't heed him, right? Then, just as the generation in the wilderness rejected the good news about the land, what happens to the apostolic generation, the generation of our master and the apostles? They also reject the good news about the master and the good news about the kingdom of heaven that he was teaching and preaching. So the writer of the book of Hebrews is bringing a warning that just as God did not spare that original generation, the generation of Moses, he won't spare this generation either if they reject the good news. Both require faith, both require obedience. And he says, those who disobeyed weren't able to enter. And you think about how long is a generation in the Bible? Based on our Torah portion, we say, well, that's 40 years because God had the generation wander for 40 years, right?
Right.
Okay. Well, how long was it between the death of Yeshua and his ascension and the destruction of the temple?
40 years.
40 years. And when was the temple destroyed? It was destroyed on Tish B'Av, as it says in our materials. It explains in our materials. And when did the people reject the land? On Tish B'Av. So you see how these things are
tremendous. Yeah, there's all kinds of links and parallels, and yeah, I'm loving this. Keep going.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So the generation of the master standing on the edge of the kingdom. Yeshua comes with a good news message, just like Joshua did. This other Yeshua, this Yehoshua, is coming with this good news message, and his message is repent. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. It's within our grasp. If we just go in and take it. It's like the same message.
Yeah, totally.
You know?
Yeah.
Right. And if they had heeded Yeshua's message of the gospel and repented, they would have entered the kingdom. And the Messianic era was, it was hanging there in their grasp. But they forfeited the opportunity, just like the generation of Moses. On the other hand, though, and this is important for the writer of the book of Hebrews, there are some individuals from the generation of Moses who did enter, right? Those who had faith, right. Joshua and Caleb being the only two.
A remnant,
right? Yeah. But Joshua and Caleb then kind of become symbolic in that sense for the disciples of Yeshua who do take his message, who do repent, who do say, yes, you are the Messiah. We believe in you. And so the writer of the book of Hebrews is saying, don't let go of your faith. Don't be lost with the generation. Be like Joshua and Caleb who persevere in their faith. Hold on to your faith in Yeshua. So the land of Israel, in this analogy, then represents the kingdom. It's the place where, and you might, well, why is that? Because there is a real geography to the kingdom. The land of Israel is the place where the kingdom is going to be played out. Because Messiah is going to come and he's going to occupy that throne in literal physical Jerusalem in the land of Israel. And that's the center of the kingdom. So this is why he's able to make this equation, another rest, my rest. And even when we come into the world to come, there's still a Jerusalem, the new Jerusalem. There's still this center, even in the world to come, there's still an aspect of the Holy Land, New Jerusalem.
Daniel, these parallels are very vivid, and this is clear. And I love how you're drawing this line, Hebrews 4, Psalm 95, back to our Parsha, and it's bringing a lot of clarity. So I'm loving this. I got one more question, then we'll let our Torah clubs loose for their own discussion. So when the writer of Hebrews in that text says, "Today, if you hear his voice," what's he referring to?
Right. Okay. So today, if you hear his voice, we have to understand that's like Shema Yisrael, to hear God's voice. Shema Koli, listen to my voice. That means not just to hear, but to obey. It's a Hebrew idiom. So today, if you obey my voice. But the writer of Hebrews is referring us back to the beginning of the epistle. At the beginning of the epistle of Hebrews, he said, God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers, in the prophets, in many portions, in many ways, in these last days, has spoken to us in his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things. So when he says, today, if you hear his voice, how is God speaking to us today, in these last days, through his Son? So in other words, today, if you hear his voice means today, if you found Yeshua, if you have heard his teaching and his messianic claims, then you better heed him. You better obey him. You better hold on to him. You better have faith. Don't be like the generation in the wilderness that failed to heed the good news message of Joshua and Caleb. Make sure that you're holding on to the good news message of this Yehoshua. There's an interesting parallel in the Jerusalem Talmud that's interpreted to mean, today, if you will heed his voice, means today, if you heed his voice, the Messiah will come.
Gotcha. Daniel, listen, I want to thank you for joining us today. This is a great, it's not only great insight, but I think it's a great challenge for us in Torah Club, for all of us as leaders and students and so forth. And I hope that your words, as we just, think about this and this ongoing challenge, if you will, that it will really inspire all of us to continue to hear Hashem's voice and to obey and to really stay in that place of Messiah's rest. So, hey, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks.
Well, thank you for joining us for this discussion of Parsha Shalach. I hope you have a great and meaningful discussion in your club. Shalom.